Hello, everyone. 안녕하세요, 여러분. 환영합니다. Welcome. My name is Alma Soongi Beck. I am one of the climate justice co-chairs of the Climate Reality Project Bay Area chapter. It is my pleasure to welcome the speakers of our program, How to Fight the Climate Crisis and Militarism with Veterans for Peace. So I will start us off with a land acknowledgement and talk a little bit about how Indigenous people consist of 5% of the world population and yet protect 80% of global biodiversity, according to National Geographic. And so for us as climate activists and as settlers, occupiers, and guests on this land of Native peoples of the San Francisco Bay Area and California and around the world, I always ask this question and think about what is our role and our place and our connection to the land we are on and to the original peoples of this land. And from this perspective, I offer this acknowledgement of the land and the original peoples of these lands, the Ohlone bands of Ramaytush, Karkin, Chochenyo, the Tamian Nation, the Coast Miwok, Bay Miwok, and Sierra Miwok, the Pomo, Patkin, Yokut, and Wapo. And with that, I would like to introduce Vince, Jim, and Gary with the Veterans for Peace Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. It is part of a worldwide movement to mitigate the climate crisis and promote peace and justice, climate, racial, and economic justice. As educators and activists, we focus on the U.S. militarism's damage to the climate, its vast and largely unreported greenhouse gas emissions, its role as military protection for oil corporations, its squandering of trillions needed to address climate and people's needs, and its promotion of war, which is itself a human, climate, and environmental disaster. So please welcome Jim, Vince, and Gary.
Hi, everybody. I think Jim is going to start us off, and I just want to say a few things about Jim. I've known Jim, oh my God, a long time, maybe 35 or 40 years. First in Vietnam Vets Against the War, and then in Veteran Speakers Alliance, which was kind of a precursor to Veterans for Peace. And Jim has an interesting story to tell. It's a story of his journey from being a combat medic in the Vietnam War to being an environmentalist. And we like it when we can get Jim to come to these presentations because he sets a wonderful tone for us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Oh, thank you, Vince. Such a warm introduction. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been part of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project for about 4 years, but I've been an environmentalist for a very long time. And I'll tell you a little about the part of my story that relates to our discussion today. Now, I was drafted into the Vietnam War, which the Vietnamese call the American War. And after my training, I was assigned to be a medic in an infantry battalion commanded by Colonel George Armstrong Custer III in Vietnam. So as a platoon medic, I witnessed, besides the human toll of the war, immense destruction to the earth. My unit operated in areas where resistance forces often disappeared into tunnels. So if we couldn't find the Vietnamese who'd been defined as our enemy, we called in the Air Force to destroy all that concealed or sustained our so-called enemy. So planes bombed rice paddies, forests, fields, rivers, and defoliated huge tracts of land. I wasn't in Vietnam long before I realized we're fighting the earth, the whole Vietnamese landscape. If we couldn't find the Vietnamese, we could, and we did, destroy their land. So after my time in the war, I became an environmentalist, and I studied at UC Berkeley. And one class, ecosystemology, I want to tell you about briefly. For a final exam, Students were told to go out onto the campus and choose 1 square inch of earth to write about as an ecosystem. That is, to write about the relationships between organisms, about what sustained this patch of earth. I remembered as I was writing that a Cobra gunship, an assault helicopter that I saw a lot of in Vietnam, could put a bullet in every square inch of a football field in less than 1 minute. And at the same time, here I am studying far from the war, I'm studying this inch of earth, which was part of and sustained by everything around it. Aldo Leopold, a great ecologist, wrote that land is a community, is the basic concept of ecology, but that land is to be loved and respected is an extension of ethics. And Max Lieberman, an indigenous scientist, deepens this insight. I quote, he defines land, he writes it with a capital L. He defines land as the unique entity that is the combined living spirit of plants, animals, humans, histories, and events. One more time, the unique entity that is the combined living spirit of plants, animals, humans, histories, and events. Now, if we can take that in, just think of what our relationship to this earth would be and with each other. I want to quote another indigenous person, Jack Forbes of the Powhatan Lenape peoples of Delaware wrote, I can lose my hands and still live. I can lose my legs and still live. I can lose my eyes and still live. But if I lose the air, I die. If I lose the earth, I die. If I lose the water, I die. If I lose the plants and animals, I die. All of these things are more a part of me, more essential to my every breath than is my so-called body. What is my real body? So with that question, Jack Forbes is referring to this whole wide, beautiful earth that sustains us all. And I hope that quote will form a kind of circle for our discussion tonight. And with that, I want to pass the baton to my old friend Vince that I've known for, I'd say more than 4 decades, actually. He's also a Vietnam veteran and a co-founder of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. So handing it over to you, Vince. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Jim. That wonderful introduction. This slideshow, we've done variations of it for quite some time, but this particular version is one we did about a month and a half ago to the leadership of 350.org, and hence you see the 350 logo next to ours. Briefly, we in Veterans for Peace thinks that we should make all our best efforts to avoid war and violence and figure out other ways to solve our problems as human beings. What we want to do is we want to work on reporting U.S. military emissions and reducing them, redirect the U.S. military budget away from military spending and onto more human needs, and work for climate justice and peace and a livable planet. And we in Veterans for Peace think we're uniquely positioned to talk about these two issues of militarism and climate. I have two quotes here. One from Greta Thunberg, I want you to act as if the house is on fire because it is. And the second one is part of a speech that Dwight Eisenhower gave when he was leaving the White House after his second term. And the main thing about that speech was a warning of the military-industrial complex. But this is other things that he said, all the guns that are made, all the warships, every rocket fired does signify a theft from those who hunger and not feed, those who are cold and not, basically, poor people of the world. So let's talk about militarism and our pocketbooks. 3 key points I want to make. The U.S. military pollutes a lot. It's the single largest organizational emitter of carbon in the world, and probably the single largest user. The U.S. military spends a lot of money, a lot of money. And the third one we want to make is you can do something about it. We go into all this in depth, and it's all on our website. So there was a time when we're talking about 350 parts per million of carbon as a safe level. We passed that in 1990. We're 71.5. We're 71.5 points above that parts per million, or at 421. And the time to act is now. I mean, it was a noble and terrific goal to have that, but we haven't maintained it. However, it seems that the 2 current international wars in Ukraine and Gaza have pushed the looming climate crisis from the front pages of our consciousness and out of the headlines. I mean, we were working with the Biden administration before the Ukraine, some of their climate people, and since Ukraine, not a peep. They kind of put us on ignore. The U.S. military is the largest institutional consumer of oil in the world, and we don't know how much. We have estimates because they won't say. And they've kind of institutionalized. They don't have to say. One of the first climate conferences that was held in Kyoto in 1997, and the U.S. lobbied heavily to exclude military emissions and military oil use from being measured. And the Paris Climate Accords continued it, and it's still going on today. In fact, the Air Force said they made a report of what they used, and they lied. They basically used the estimates of this scientist, Dr. Anita Crawford, who's been researching military fuel use for decades, and they used her estimates. But anyway, you have this graphic here of this B-52 Stratofortress, and it consumes as much fuel in an hour as an average car would use in 7 years. And it probably pollutes more because it does not use unleaded, uses high octane jet fuel, and it does not have any catalytic converters. So it fuels more, and it's not the biggest plane. The biggest plane is a C-5A Galaxy, which is used to move basically tanks. You can put 2 tanks in a C-5A, and so you get a fleet of C-5As. You can fly a regiment of tanks to any place in the world really quickly and be refueled in the midair, so they can go anywhere. The war in the Ukraine is responsible for 150 million tons of CO emissions, experts say. And those are estimates for the first 18 months of conflicts. And so far, you can add another 36% for what's been spent so far and what's been destroyed for future reconstruction. So as the destruction goes on, the fuel needed to reconstruct goes up. Emissions from Israel's war in Gaza have had an immense effect on the climate catastrophe. The first months of the conflict produced more climate warming gases than the 20 most vulnerable nations in the year. I mean, this graphic shows a human suffering, but also serves to heighten the awareness of the devastating environmental impact that was done. Climate and environmental impacts of war industry are many. Environmental issues include air and water pollution, chemical spills, release of radioactive dust at nuclear power plants, and much more. For example, a single military jet burns at least 800 gallons of fuel per hour, and a tank consumes 300 gallons of of gasoline in every 8 hours. Now, in your car, when you're driving a car, you try to figure out how many miles to the gallon you're getting. In a tank, it's how many gallons you use to go a mile. So it's a complete opposite. Russia's Nord Stream pipeline has been sabotaged, leading to ocean contamination and to the release of almost 23,000 kilograms of methane per hour. That's the equivalent of about 630,000 pounds of coal every hour. And speaking of coal, Germany is now increasing its mining of its soft coal to burn in power plant. Death comes now to those in the war zone, but later for many more far away. There is no such thing as a green war. The effects of war and war preparation are polluting and long-lasting. For example, depleted uranium is used in tank armor and in some bullets. It is 40% depleted of radioactivity, but there's 60% there. But it also retains all the toxicity of natural uranium, which has effects on people's reproductive systems. Even 50 years or 60 almost after the Vietnam War, children there are still maimed by unexploded ordnance or born with severe birth defects from the transgenerational impact of Agent Orange. The current estimates that it will take at least, at the current rate, it will take at least 300 years to find and neutralize all the unexploded ordnance in Vietnam. In fact, I read in the paper last year where they found another bomb in Germany from World War II. So there's probably stuff there that's unexploded. And you look at these other wars and it'll be the same thing. As far as the Agent Orange, we don't know how many generations it will take that to work itself out of our bodies. It's not a genetic mutation as such. I can't explain the science, but it's something that's gotten in your body and might take generations to work itself out, and we're not sure how many. There's also a thing called PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkylide substances. They're a group of man-made chemicals known as forever chemicals that are used in firefighting foam, Teflon, and many other products and can cause reproductive damage. Now, in this graphic, the picture on the right is a burn pit. Anybody that's been in the military, deployed in some war zone knows what a burn pit is. You just dig a hole and you throw solid waste in there to incinerate it. Computer parts, human waste, anything. You pour diesel on it to ignite it. And that's a normal way to do that. And there's been lawsuits by both veterans and civilians of being exposed to the toxic effect of it. All of us that were in Vietnam, we're all time bombs for Agent Orange. We could die without it affecting us, or we could get some strange cancer before we die. And I know I have friends who are veterans who have passed away because of the Agent Orange exposure and the cancers they contracted. And then, of course, there's uranium and uranium mining and processing and production of nuclear weapons. They all have tremendous carbon footprints, even without exploding them, which we, of course, hope never happens. None of us wants to see a nuclear war. Any war is climate destruction, and preparation for war is the same thing. Accurately accounting for military emissions is a difficult task, given the Kyoto Protocol decision and also the wide variety of contributors to the military blueprint. There's many things. And also what's kind of not in here so much is the military contractors and supply chain contributors. This slide is from 2020, and there's approximately 750 United States military bases in over 80 countries. And there are troops and military contractors throughout the world. Some bases are really tiny lily pads, which is maybe a warehouse that's got pre-positioned weaponry and supplies, and others are huge complexes like large Air Force bases, including housing, hospitals, bowling alleys, golf courses, and power plants. Now, if you notice this graph, there's a large string of them that goes from what's known as the Middle East, but actually West Asia through the Arabian Peninsula, which is where the majority of the petroleum supply comes from. So basically, the main function of the military is to protect the oil supply lines from around the world and make sure the U.S. industrial economy keeps on humming. In the past, coal-fired warships required strategically placed refueling throughout the world as the U.S. Navy expanded its reach. On December 16, 1907, President Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet, which was a force of 16 battleships, bristling with guns and painted a sparkling white, steamed out of Hampton Roads, Virginia, to begin its 43,000-mile, 14-month circumnavigation of the globe to demonstrate the world America's naval prowess. I mean, Roosevelt was the first person that said the U.S. needs to be on the world stage and we need a Navy. Now, to do this, be gone for 14 months and go that, they had to have places to stop to get refueled and resupplied. And then now continuing the second photograph over there is a picture of a U.S. carrier, which is nuclear powered. However, the planes are not nuclear powered. They need jet fuel. And all the support ships are not nuclear powered. And they continually need to be resupplied. These are in the Persian Gulf in defense of the oil supplies. Let's talk about discretionary spending. This is Biden's proposed fiscal 2025 budget. 1.6 trillion. Probably 69% of that is going to military. And we've kind of expanded the military here to things that aren't really on the military, but probably should be. Homeland security, the veterans, treatment of veterans, and also a large part of the Department of Energy's budget. Anything nuclear is not in the military budget, is in the Department of Energy's budget. So what this means is that $69 out of every 100 federal dollars goes towards militarization and support system, including the military, homeland security, vets affairs, and nuclear weapons. And that leaves just $31 out of every 100 for everything else in the discretionary budget, from housing programs to public education, public health, environmental and protection, and more. Militarized funding in the proposal totals 1.1 trillion for fiscal 25, and it includes 850 billion for the Pentagon, 34 billion for nuclear weapons, 11.6 billion for international military aid so far. That could go up depending on how things go. 62 billion in non-emergency funding for homeland security. Now it could be more because they might need emergency funding. And this includes 9.3 billion for immigration and customs enforcement, ICE, and 17 billion for customs and border protection. Also 113 billion for veterans affairs medical programs. Now the Pentagon has been audited several times, 6, and it has failed every one. And they just, what's this phrase? You spend like a drunken sailor in port. That's how the military spends. And who gets most of this money? It's these 5 companies here: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman. And there's their military sales, and there's their CEO compensation. One thing I want to mention here about military aid, say you're giving military aid to the Ukraine. It's like a debit card, but it can only be spent at these 5 banks. You can't spend it anyplace else. So that's how it works. They get the credits, but they can only use the credits with these companies. So actually, it's numbers moving around. It's no actual money really goes to Ukraine or anything like that. And we could do a whole slideshow just on 5 military contractors. Now, this graph is also kind of interesting. Who benefits from military spending? Now, the blue graph at the top is the stock prices of military contractor stocks, and then the bottom one in sort of brownish is where everybody else is. So it's a lot of money going to military and a lot of things getting ignored. There's a lot of climate mitigation that could get ignored. We could be helping a lot of other countries who have less economic power than we do mitigate the climate in their areas, but we're kind of stuck on this. And it's a matter of priorities. And this quote that Martin Luther King exemplifies it. As an example, the US spends 20 more times more on the military than it does on climate issues, 10 times more on border protection than on climate. The International Organization on Immigration estimates that 200 million climate refugees by 2050, but some estimates are as much as 1 billion. Countries with the largest historical emissions, the United States, 27%, European Union, 25%, China, 11%, and Russia, 8%, are the countries today that are erecting towering border walls. And the statistics and the information is also on our website. And we can see this on the web on the border with Mexico. I mean, the US government is dead serious about climate change, but not in the way you might think. While carbon taxes and green grids remain decidedly out of reach on Capitol Hill, planners of the Pentagon have been quietly preparing to take charge of a planet shaken by climate chaos. Investigative journalist Christian Parenti refers to the plans as the politics of the armed lifeboat. And they want to kind of make all their facilities around the world withstand the climate so they can continue to extract resources. Between 2013 to 2018, the US spent an average of $19.6 billion a year on border protection versus $1 billion on climate. So you have a 10-to-1 ratio. Other countries do not report their financing on that. A poll conducted by YouGov for the American Friends Service Committee said that 56% of US adults would like to cut Pentagon spending. And this is a very difficult thing to do, given I think the terror that most people feel in their lives. We need to be safe. So we need a strong military. And I think our job is to convince people that we're going to be safer without a military. We're going to be safer if everybody's safe. No Palestinian child can be safe till every Israeli child is safe. And conversely, no Israeli child can be safe till every Palestinian child is safe. And we need to kind of shift the thinking to look at the world that way. Several studies, including one at Brown University's Cost of War Project, confirm that investing in jobs associated with the green economy can produce a larger return on society's investment than military spending. And as we transition to a green economy, it is important to make it a just economy, to retain good, high-paying jobs so working people can have a good life as well as people with access to a lot of resources. Practice, pollution, or entertainment. Well, this is a picture of the Blue Angels. So far, we've examined the military's tremendous contribution to the climate crisis and their voracious appetite for our tax dollars. Each Blue Angels or the Air Force Thunderbirds that flies overhead for our entertainment usually uses approximately 7,200 gallons of jet fuel per hour per each jet. And that's equivalent of the CO2 being produced by a car driven over 210,000 miles. On a more human level, 10% of these stunt pilots have died in aircraft crashes since their inception in 1953. Most of them have died in training, but some have died in actual air shows. So I'd like to have Gary come up now and talk about No Mas in San Diego.
All right, thank you, Vince, and thanks for all that information. I know that was a pretty fact-heavy presentation. All of that and sources can be found on our website that is placed in the chat right now. But probably about 7 years ago in San Diego, Veterans for Peace started protesting the Miramar Air Show. And the Navy bills it as the world's largest military air show. And in fact, it can attract up to 250,000 people each year. We sent 2 of our members onto the campus there, onto the tarmac, and we produced a short documentary called Disneyland of War, wherein we looked at kids as young as 8 to 10 aiming machine guns at each other with uniformed servicemen encouraging them. And so our approach was to talk about this appeal to youth and it's probably inappropriate recruiting at such an early age, the glorification of violence with no discussion of any type of consequence. Well, we felt good about what we did, but we didn't get much community support. 3 years ago, we changed our approach in a large degree because when I talk to I'm also a member of 350.org in San Diego 350. And I found that there was a little bit of a disconnect, that my 350 friends, probably like you, are locally focused and are doing good works on a local level within our communities. But the military, being the largest polluter, is really getting off without accountability or transparency. Well, we've shown this slideshow to about 140 different organizations now in the last 3.5 to 4 years. And when we look at the Blue Angels and Thunderbirds pollution as a means of engaging people in discussing the military's pollution and contribution to the climate crisis and the way it spends money, a lot of people look at this and say, well, I never looked at it that way before. Next slide, please. So we gathered support in San Diego, and this last year we had 24 local groups ranging from climate activist, Climate Reality Project in San Diego, in fact, San Diego 350. We've had activist clubs, social justice clubs, and religious groups all listen to what we had to say, and they've endorsed our actions and said, yeah, we want more accountability. We want more transparency. We're not calling to defund the military totally, but we're saying we're all in this together, and we want to have a say in what's going on with how our money's being spent and how to control some of this pollution. So in fact, this year, we've rolled this campaign. We've named it No Mas. It started out as No Miramar Air Show, and then it morphed to No Military Air Shows. And that's what it is right now, no military air shows. And we have gone coast to coast, in effect. Next slide, Vince. And that there are going to be approximately 63 to 65 national air shows this year. And we've identified certain cities that have activity either from us, Veterans for Peace, and other peace groups, and or climate activist groups. For example, Seafair in Seattle is very vocal and will have protests coming up when they have their Seafair Air Show the first part of August. We've already seen protesters at the Annapolis graduation in Baltimore, where 350.org, Veterans for Peace, and Code Pink all got together to protest that air show. And we're looking again to do something in San Diego. We're also doing something nationally with 350.org to target Brunswick, Maine, San Francisco. Hopefully we can get some activity. I know that there's been protests before up in the Bay Area at Fleet Week, but we feel that when more people hear about the military's role and contribution to the climate crisis, we'll get more energy and more synergy between climate activists and peace activists. Next slide. Prime Video has recently introduced a documentary, a Hollywood-produced documentary called The Blue Angels. So we're even asking people who do not have military air shows to vote a thumbs down if they see this propaganda video talking about the stunts and acrobatics of the Blue Angels, who incidentally are flying $75 million killing machines that do not drop marshmallows on people. They're designed as warplanes. So this slide was taken last year up in Seattle. That was a group effort between people in Seattle and Tacoma in veterans organizations and climate organizations. So we hope to see that duplicated at other locations this year. And what we ask of you is if you know of another group, whether it be social justice, church affiliated, political affiliated, or climate affiliated, find us the opportunity. And we have about 8 people who are trained to do this slideshow. And we're ready, willing, and eager to get more people involved in this. We're convinced that these are both existential threats, and the 2 international wars have merely heightened discussions about war and really focused some attention on the environmental and climate hazards that war brings. So this is what we're asking of you. This was last year. Members of 350 as well as Veterans for Peace protesting the air show. We ask that you help us spread the word. And we're also asking, the Seafair in San Francisco is coming up in October. That gives us 3.5 or 4 months to put something together to protest this and spread the word.
Fleet Week in San Francisco, Gary.
Pardon?
Fleet Week in San Francisco.
Right. I'm sorry. What did I say?
Seafair.
Oh, Seafair. Yeah, that's coming up in August in Seattle. Fleet Week's October 11th through the 13th.
If you're interested in finding out more about what we're going to do with this, you can send an email into our email. I guess you can put it in the chat, Gary, climate@veteransforpeace.org.
Sure.
And I'm very interested in showing more of these slideshows around the Bay Area, and seeing what we can do this year with Fleet Week. And I want to thank everybody for being here. We're stronger together. There's a rich history of peace and environmental organizing, and our future plan of the planet and our future and the future of the planet relies on these movements working together.
I have a question.
Okay.
So Gary was talking about the No Mask campaign that pulled in some of the climate groups. And I was curious, did you get traction on the air show end? Or maybe you said that and I missed it.
Yes, that's what drew people together. With the 350, it started with us in San Diego and spread to Seattle. And we've seen it already in evidence this year in Annapolis. And we also have interest in Virginia Beach at the end of the year with the Naval Air Station Oceana Air Show. So it's something that when people think about it, how can you really protest the military? It is such a behemoth of an organization, and climate groups, I think, traditionally have been a little hesitant to nibble at that topic because your plates are full locally. But when you think about it in certain areas, such I'm sure the Bay Area, similar to San Diego, the military has a presence, and if you don't account for their pollution. I know our local climate action plans in San Diego don't even mention the military because they have no jurisdiction. So the military is going scot-free, and we're being asked to reduce our carbon footprint. And so, there's something wrong here. So the military has a track record of failing 6 fiscal audits, and we know that they are not accurate, nor are they transparent in reporting their emissions. And, look, New Delhi was 121 degrees today. We can no longer do business as usual. We've got to, we should expect the same of our institutions as we do of our citizens. And that's transparency and accountability and a reduction in carbon footprint. So we're asking you to help us. We're all in this together, and we want climate people and we want peace people to talk about these topics and to educate ourselves so we don't turn our tail and avoid discussing this when people says, that's the sound of freedom, or that's what's keeping us safe, because it's not.
Yeah, I'm hoping this year to get some traction at the Fleet Week in San Francisco in October, which is why I wanted to do this slideshow here. And I'm, like I said, any other parts of climate reality in the Bay Area or other groups that you know of, I'm going to lobby some myself, and we'll see what we can do. We have plenty of time between now and October.
We have a question from the floor. Kathleen.
Hi, thanks. I am thrilled to hear that somebody's working on this. I used to work in San Francisco, and I was on the 15th floor of our building, and whenever the Fleet Week thing was going on, literally the windows, kind of like flex. It's terrifying, frankly, to be there. And I was also thinking about the emissions, and I'm so glad to hear somebody else is working on that. I guess I love everything that you're doing here, but I'm also wondering, how do you deal with the questions that I'm sure you must get from people who have that perspective that you just said? The military is what's keeping us safe, and there's conflicts happening. You can't just suddenly close up the wallet and walk away. What's the realistic process that you're advocating, or how would you respond to that kind of an argument?
Well, we get that argument all the time.
I figured you would.
We're not asking to shut the military down, but what we're saying is, as citizens, we have to take the steps to demand accountability and transparency. And if the military were to say we're canceling the air shows because of pollution, what a great statement that would be to our citizenry that we have to take this seriously. This is not something we can let somebody else do or put it off till next month or next year. We've got to do something now. And so they can certainly curtail the Blue Angels and Thunderbirds without affecting operational readiness. 2 years ago, I was interviewed by our local PBS station, and I gave them our rationale for why we're doing this. And the Marine base who operates Miramar now sent out their public information officer, and during the first statements, he said, well, we know that we acknowledge that the air show pollutes a lot, but that's not the point. Well, we breathe the air here in San Diego, and that is exactly the point. We can't let them get away with it. Now, we're not saying shut the military down, although personally, I have my own feelings about that. But in giving this presentation 140 times, that doesn't resonate with climate people, and we don't want it to. We're not saying we want to move everybody way over to the left. We're saying we've got to open our eyes. This is barreling down on us, and here's another avenue we can take to reduce pollution.
I would like to say something to that as well. We have this term national security, and most people will define that strictly in military terms. Who's got the most guns? When we finally have enough guns, we'll be safe, is sort of the idea. The climate crisis is a clear and immediate threat to our security and that of innumerable beings. And so, part of this work for me is redefining some of these terms. National security. Another one, support the troops. I was a troop. I was in an unnecessary war. I don't want troops to be in unnecessary wars that, as Vince was mentioning in the slideshow, the Pentagon is preparing for climate-induced wars. The thinking is that the climate crisis will cause unstable governance in climate-vulnerable countries, and so they're preparing by building up instead of really doing something to address climate change. So I want to do my little part to try to redefine these terms that are very popular and I think very harmful as well.
I want to take a stab at this question too. I think one of the things that I do when I meet people like this is I listen to them a lot, and I ask them questions. Well, why do you think that? I try to engage and make a connection with them on a one-on-one basis. In a debate like Gary's talking about, I think it's a little different. But I'd still say, well, why do you think that's true? And do you go to Jim's point of redefining what security means? As I said in my talk, no Palestinian child is going to be safe till every Israeli child is safe, and conversely, no Israeli child is going to be safe till every Palestinian child is safe. And we have to redefine what we mean about safety. And I think that upsets a lot of people, and you just have to work with people where they're at and figure out what your in is to try to move them a little bit.
So we have 6 minutes left until 7:05. Would any of the speakers like to do a really short wrap-up final words?
I would just like to finish with, I know we have a core group who have taken the time to listen to us tonight, and I recognize you as activists. In my dealings with activists belong to more than one group. Your time is valuable. And when you work with more than one group, we are asking you help us find an opportunity to give this presentation to another group. It doesn't matter how small. We did one to 3 people up in Portland, Oregon, about 2 years ago, but they were really activists, and it grew from there. So that's one of the reasons I do this, and I'm sure Jim and Vince have similar reasons why we do it too. And so we are asking you, help us do this.
I have a few final words as well. J.E. Siraj is a senior Army official, and he has stated that climate change does not alter the Army's mission to deploy, fight, and win. And I want to say there's no such thing as sustainable dominance of this earth, nor any way to seek justice within such a context. I feel like this obsession with military superiority, and there's such big money in it, in many ways, it sidelines the most essential need, a habitable planet. A habitable planet.
I don't think I have anything to add to that, Jim.
Okay, so we're bringing the presentation to a close. You can join Vets for Peace as a veteran or as an associate, which is the word they use for non-veterans. The link is in the chat, or also donate to support the work. You heard the call to action from the panel in terms of talking with your organizations about inviting any of them to come and give this presentation. And there's the email climate@veteransforpeace.org. If you are not a member of our chapter of Climate Reality Project Bay Area and you would like to get notices of programs like this in the future, please join us. It's free. And the link for that is on the chat, and it's also on our website. So thank you to Vince, Jim, and Gary for your time and your commitment and your dedication, for the incredibly important information you shared with us. And we hope to see you out there as you build your work and build your coalition against militarism to fight the climate crisis.